name is Claudia Manca, and I'm a researcher and assistant professor at University of Bologna and Bologna Business School, where I have been developing my research on flexible work and flexible workplaces. In the last decade, we have seen work and workplaces undergoing a dramatic transformation. Differently from 10 years ago, today we can see, for example, many companies providing staff with option to work flexibly across multiple locations, many times even outside the main office. And this might have produced in some the feeling that the physical workplace is not as important as it used to be before. However, if we look at what is going on in the business world, we can see that that's not really the case, because companies are still relying a lot on the workplaces for supporting activities that are becoming increasingly mobile, collaborative, and knowledge-based. And they are doing this by experimenting with alternatives to conventional office designs. So, for example, many companies are implementing collaborative or flexible workplaces, where that we can depict as some sort of organizational co-working and internal co-working that aims to support collaboration across formal organizational structures like hierarchies, roles, and departments. And collaborative workplaces, for example, also include this activity-based design, where the permanently allocated desks and cubicles are replaced by shared floor sections and hot desks that support different types of activities. But now, regardless of the label that we use or the specific design that we are considering, what we can say when comparing the modern workplace or alternative workplace with the one in the past is that there is a huge difference between these two. Because if the traditional office, the past office, was characterized by high partition, assigned offices, and functional division that emphasize individualism, efficiency, and formal structure, the modern workplace is something entirely different that offer a range of services that support flexibility and collaboration. And by services, we mean, for example, adjustable facilities, we mean various interactional spaces or facilities, and digital technologies that support flexible work by providing ubiquitous connectivity and access to work contents. Organization embrace these kind of flexible workplaces because they are driven by this idea that these places support flexibility and collaboration. However, these benefits sometimes fail to materialize. And what my study suggests is that this happens because of some contradictions that arise in this type of office spaces. For instance, in the collaborative workplace, we know that people are expected to flexibly adjust their working conditions to thrive. For example, if I feel more productive working from home, I can do that. Or if I think that it's better for me to sit next to colleagues coming from different teams, I can do this as well. However, organizations also have some structural demands that come, for example, from routines, from mutual interdependencies, deadline, and this can clash against this flexibility. For instance, if I need to coordinate with those in my team quickly because we have an upcoming deadline, how can we do that if we don't even know where they are sitting, right? So managers sometimes address these challenges by structuring employees' agenda around more planned interaction at the office, for example, an increased amount of group meetings. And this can sound as something reasonable to do. However, in this way, they are reducing their employees' flexibility by scheduling their time at the office around an increased number of planned interactions. And this comes at odds with the premises of the collaborative workplace or flexible office, where I'm supposed to have also time and space for spontaneous encounters. As a result, employees end up perceiving the flexible workplace as rigid. And this is the first contradiction that we can spot in this type of environment. But that's not the only one. In the collaborative workplace, for example, we see that collaborative patterns are supposed to become more fluid now because they are no longer organized by stable organizational structures. You can move around, which allows you to create many more ties with many more people also outside your department, or for example, coming from different organizational rankings. And yet, as humans, we have always been used to organize our relationship through some sort of stable frames of references, in particular when we are at work. For example, me and you, we are close by, not because we have been bumping into each other at the coffee machine, but because we have been sitting together for the past 10 years. And many times, managers in the collaborative offices try to recreate this stability in social relations by asking employees to sit close by, to group them together by recreating some sort of invisible boundaries around groups. But this can feed another contradiction, because in this way, the fluid collaborative space ends up with just rearranging stationary workers. Finally, a last contradiction that we can spot in this type of environment is that employees make themselves less accessible in order to regain some privacy and some control over their interactions. We know from research that exposure and privacy should be balanced in order to promote interaction. However, managers in the collaborative offices many times promote this kind of ostensive collaborative engagement with the office space, suggesting that if you are in a collaborative office, you need to interact just for interaction's sake. But this can prompt many to withdraw from the office, for example, working more and more from home, making in this way the collaborative office way less collaborative than the traditional one. They are, and researchers have identified several tensions that stem from workplace transformations. When it comes to my research, for example, identify this tension in this contraposition between the ideals of flexibility, fluidity, and exposure that are expressed by these flexible and collaborative offices on the one hand, and on the other side, people's needs for structure, stability, and privacy. And the way in which people, and particularly managers, work through this tension is fundamental for avoiding inconsistencies and creating productive conditions for people to thrive in this type of office spaces. First responsibility is the one of the company, in the sense that the company has to make sure that the spaces are properly designed to accustom employees' needs, so that people don't feel that the company is just disinvesting from them to reduce costs. But because many times this is one of the rationale underlying this type of initiatives. But of course, a crucial role in this regard is the one of managers, because we have seen in the discussion we had before about the contradictions, how their actions sometimes force inconsistencies and bring negative outcomes for people and organizations. However, manager can also find some alternative approaches that aid collaboration and adaptability and shield people from stress. For instance, rather than favoring structure over flexibility by planning more and more group meetings, what manager can do is to develop some predictable routes in the office space and combine them with some technologies that enhance flexibility or findability. And this allows people to be more flexible, because people can still move around, but also facilitates coordinations by structuring, in a way, office trajectories. In this way, we are able to embrace both flexibility and structure, as they are both needed. Or instead, for example, of asking employees to sit close by, manager can just sustain relationship by arranging more social gatherings and group rituals, because in this way they create what we call in research third spaces, that are placed outside conventional office times and conventional sometimes office spaces, to provide some relational stability, while fluidity is preserved in this conventional office hour and spaces. So these are just a few examples now of approaches that manager can use to make the situation less stressful for employees while sustaining collaborative dynamics. It's an interesting term that indeed identifies some traps of flexible work that researchers have claimed for quite a long time. My perspective is this: when we work from home, managers many times lose sight of an employee's activities, and this somehow comes at odds with their supervisory role. Some managers deal with this kind of collapse of certainties or identity threat, if you wish, in a way that they reframe their role. So, for example, when I was doing interviews to head managers in the flexible offices, I found that many managers talk of themselves no longer as supervisors or bosses, but as coaches, so that the primary responsibility is reframed around ensuring that employees do not feel stranded or without support, even if these are not collocated together with the rest of the team. Other managers try to cope with this paranoia by preventing people from working at home, sometimes even stigmatizing those who decide to do so. And sometimes even those people who are allowed to work from home are often checked upon by their managers, because managers want to make sure that people are actually working at home. But this can have very counterproductive effects. But how? Well, we know that many people work from home because they need to do so, for example, because they want to accustom work and life demands, right? So they don't want to be suspected of social loafing, for example, by their managers and colleagues, but at the same time, they don't want to lose this privilege. So They don't want the others to think that they are just taking advantage of flexibility at the expense of the group outcome. So to avoid this, many times flexible workers or people who work from home tend to work extra hard and make themselves always accessible to people in order to prove that they are productive and reachable even when they are at home, which is of course a source of stress. And that's not the best way to support individual productivity. Hard to say because we are entering in the domain of speculation here. But what we know is that, of course, COVID-19 has deeply affected how and where we work, prompting somehow more digital interaction and fewer face-to-face ones. And some may argue that this is something just contingent to COVID. However, as a matter of fact, the trend toward flexible office is something that has already started a long time back. And it's already quite widespread in many countries, in particular in the so-called global north. The recent pandemic has just accelerated this phenomenon, leading many more companies, even in the global south, I can speak, for example, for Southern Europe, to embrace flexible designs in a way to custom flexible ways of working and get the most out of the fewer face-to-face interactions that we are having at the office. So this is a trajectory that we have been following for years. And on this trajectory, the future of work, of course, looks hybrid in the sense that it's going to blend both physical and virtual locations and activities and interactions, which of course means enhanced opportunities for work-life balance, and much more opportunities for new connection. But it's also something that is going to increase risk for stress and risk for social isolation and sense of loneliness. So we need to be aware regarding these risks and think the way in which we design and manage our workplaces so that they can sustain hybrid work, but also equally important, people well-being and socialization. And we need to transform the flexible offices in the counterpoison to the same risks that flexible work can generate. And that's the challenge that we have ahead of us.